NACDL is the association of the nation's criminal defense bar.
Hello and welcome to this special NACDL virtual panel discussion. I'm so glad that you're able to join today. I'm Chris Adams, the president of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, NACDL. I trust many of you took advantage of the opportunity to watch the Mauritanian as part of the NACDL special screening or otherwise. You can find it on Netflix and Amazon and through any smart TV, and Nancy's shaking no, but it showed up on mine. They just wanted a fee for it.
Not Netflix, everywhere else.
Okay. Or perhaps you read the Guantánamo Diaries by Mohamedou Ould, sorry about that, Slahi, who is joining us today with his beautiful son from his home. Nominated for 2 Golden Globe Awards, with Jodie Foster winning the Best Supporting Actress, the Mauritanian is directed by Kevin MacDonald and based on Mr. Slahi's best-selling novel or memoir, The Guantánamo Diary. It's a true story of his fight for freedom after being detained and imprisoned without charge for 14 years by the US government. Alone and afraid, Mr. Slahi, portrayed by Tamar Rahim, finds allies in defense attorney Nancy Hollander, played to great effect by Jodie Foster, and her associate Terry Duncan, played by Shailene Woodley, who battles the US government for years, step by step, inch by inch, to win freedom for their client. Their advocacy, along with the evidence uncovered by an ethical military prosecutor, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Couch, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, who played a Southern JAG officer exceedingly well. He uncovers the shocking truth and ultimately proves that the human spirit of a beautiful man cannot be locked up. Going back to the early years of the so-called War on Terror, the detention center at Guantanamo Bay Naval Base, NACDL has been engaged. NACDL was there with the ACLU to form the Joint John Adams Project, providing death penalty counsel to the defendants facing capital prosecutions in that location. NACDL was there with amicus briefs in many US courts on behalf of inmates at Guantanamo, including Mr. Ould Slahi's case. NACDL's strike force was there to represent the Military Commission Defender Organization when its leadership was challenged and threatened with contempt of court for backing the ethical representation of inmates at Guantanamo. We've contributed in other ways, from being a non-governmental organization observer to providing workspace for the defense lawyers when they're in Washington, DC, when all the Pentagon would offer was workspace within the Pentagon that surprisingly to none, the defense lawyers did not have assurances would be secure. NACDL has been involved in the Guantanamo struggle and all the while has continued our advocacy to close that facility as being an abomination to justice. And this representation, this involvement, of course, has cost money, and the foundation, the NACDL Foundation, has contributed in this entire journey. You too can play a small role if you would like to support NACDL's work by going to nacdl.org/donate and supporting the Foundation for Criminal Justice. On today's great panel, the world, through this important movie, is getting a window into the horror show and disgrace of the American Constitution that is Guantanamo Bay. On behalf of NACDL, I want to thank STX Entertainment for making it possible for several hundred of us to get this special free screening to hear this vital story. We're very grateful to have the opportunity to see it and promote this important movie. I'd like to welcome all the panelists, but in particular, Mohamedou Ould Slahi, for joining us today from freedom at his home in Mauritania. This afternoon, Mr. Slahi will discuss his case, his experiences at Guantánamo, the film. He'll discuss his lawyers who are here today, and we'll get to hear from them, NACDL past president Nancy Hollander and NACDL co-chair of the Death Penalty Committee, Terry Duncan. Mr. Slahi, you know this, but let me tell you, you had a phenomenal legal team. You won the lottery by getting this legal team to represent you. This panel will be moderated by NACDL's Fourth Amendment Center Director and NACDL Guantánamo observer and expert, Jumana Musa. Jumana, have at it.
Thank you, Chris, and welcome everybody. Everybody in the office knows I've been beyond excited to moderate this panel today. And for those of you who don't know me, I do track what's happening in Guantánamo and do our advocacy for NACDL, but I also spent 5 years at Amnesty International between 2003 and 2008, following the commissions, tracking these issues. So I want to talk a little bit about our panelists and how this is going to go today. I hope you've all seen the film. If you haven't, definitely watch it after this. It is worth watching for a number of reasons, but especially as a community of defense lawyers, because unlike what we usually see out of Hollywood, where there is sort of this crusading, do-gooder, out for justice prosecutor who's going to get all the bad guys, and then these shady defense lawyers who are going to try and get them off or whatever, this really tells the story of what does it mean to be a defense lawyer, and why people do what they do, and why it's really important that you all do what you do. So again, if you haven't seen it, I really encourage you to watch it. But for those of you who have seen it, we're going to have some conversation about it today. I'm going to start by introducing everyone. I am going to ask them, I have some questions that I'm going to ask myself, and then we will open it to questions from you all. I will ask, I know there's a chat and a Q&A. I will ask, please put the questions in the Q&A. I will go through and I will be asking them to the panelists so they don't have to filter through and guess, who's answering what. But that's how we're going to go forward. This is also going to be recorded so that people can watch it later. So if there's someone you knew who missed this opportunity, we will definitely have it available for viewing later on. So just to start with some quick introductions. I know two people on this screen are very well known to the NACDL community, and one maybe not as much. So I'll start with our two sort of in-house resident experts. Of course, Nancy Hollander is a past president at NACDL. She represents, not only did she represent Mohamedou Slahi as a Guantánamo detainee, but she also continues to represent Shiri in his ongoing case in Guantánamo. And has never shied away from representing anybody that would get her some flack, including Chelsea Manning, whose release she did secure. We also have Terry Duncan, who, contrary to what you would see in the film, has never shied away from an ugly death penalty case, including the Terry Nichols case, who she defended and got a life sentence versus the death penalty in the Oklahoma City bombing. So, we'll also talk about how Terry was represented, but continues to fight to end the barbarity of the death penalty in the US and continues to defend people who are charged with death eligible crimes. And then our last panelist is, of course, the star of the film and the star of this story, which is Mohamedou Ould Slahi, and also his son Ahmed, who I think clearly has star potential, as we can see on the screen. But Mohamedou, we know this film is based on his memoir, which was based on the letters. If you watch the film, you've seen that he was writing to Nancy and Terry and his attorneys from Guantánamo, documenting his treatment and documenting what happened to him. And I think the couple of things that are super significant about that is to know that, one, he didn't speak English when he got to Guantánamo, other than, a few maybe really common phrases, right? So he learned English while he was in Guantánamo, and yet was able to write extensively about his treatment and about his experience and send that to his attorney. So I think that's significant. I think the other significant thing that it's not super clear in the film, so if you don't know, you wouldn't know. His attorneys fought and won the right to publish his memoir while he was still in detention. Because as the movie told you, he was there, he won his freedom, and then was held there for 7 more years as and there's the book, in case you're wondering, Guantánamo Diaries, which I understand is now going to be issued or be published as the Mauritanian. So it will go, with the film. But like I said, he was held for 7 more years as the Obama administration appealed. So not only did they get it published while he was in Guantánamo, his attorneys were able to get him not just released, but released to his home country, which for anyone who's been following Guantánamo at this point, there haven't been releases in years, but for those that were happening, people were being sent to third countries, places where maybe they had no extended family or nobody to greet them, as you saw the greeting at the end of the film. Here, the actual greeting when Mohamedou was allowed to go home. The other thing I'll say that I didn't realize I could already get it, but Mohamedou, with all the things that he is also now a novelist. So you can get his book, The Actual True Story of Ahmed and Zarqa. You can get it on Amazon. I think he's going to get a copy now. The cover is really beautiful. And so this is his first sort of foray into being a novelist and telling a story, not sort of his own story, but a story of work of fiction. And there's the book. Like I said, the cover is really beautiful. It's got the blue eye on it, which of course is meant to ward off evil or protect you from evil. So you can look it up. If you don't think you want to read the details of torture, you can read a beautiful novel that he has put out. So I did want to start, like I said, I have questions for all of you. And I am going to start first, Mohamedou, I'd like to start with you because this is your story. It was told very much in your words. And I would love to start with your reflections. One of the things for me is when I was working at Amnesty, I worked with a lot of torture survivors, and many of them who had sort of, everybody reacts to it in different ways, but many had sort of taken it on as a mission to work to end torture or do other types of work. And so for you, I think just to put it in context for people, you were in Guantánamo for over 14 years. And before you got to Guantánamo, of course, you had been shipped first to Jordan, which I think on the torture scale is somewhere like less than Syria, but worse than the United States, then sent to Afghanistan before you got to Guantánamo. So some years of torture and then many years of detention and isolation before you got home. You've only been home for about 4.5 years now. So, on balance, you've had less time sort of out by far than in. And so I would love if you could talk to people about what that was like for you in terms of transitioning to being back home, transitioning to being back in society. I think for many of our members, they understand sort of reentry from prison, which is one context in the United States, but this is a very different type of reentry because it's, after a lack of process, a rendition where you were just sort of spirited away in the middle of the night, where there was no process, no ability to tell your family, no real good ability to communicate regularly or get visits from anybody. And so all of that plus the torture, it paints a very different scenario in terms of coming back and reentering and sort of how you work through that. I would love to hear a little bit about that from you.
First, I would like to thank you very much, Jumana. And I would like to thank the NACDL members and especially thank my lawyers, Nancy, Hollander, and Terry, and the lawyers who couldn't be here, who represented me on and off. And give a shout, and Linda and Sylvia. Thank you all, and many others, ACLU, Henna, and I know there are many lawyers who work behind the scenes. And I just thank you so much, and I'm so grateful for your bravery. Nancy and knows that defending people like me is not popular, because the assumption was if the US government says you are a bad person, you are a bad person. There is no need for a jury, no need for trial, no need for anything. It's like we don't know those people, but we know they're bad. The only thing the US government know about me that I was a bad person. Nothing else. And of course, like you said, back not easy. To this very day, I'm struggling, and I don't really know, My psychiatrist was not very optimistic. He told me I need to stay the same time outside prison as I stayed inside prison in order to get back my life together. And many people think that the only time I spent in prison is 14 years plus in Guantánamo Bay alone, but I was also rendered in Jordan and briefly to Afghanistan. And I was under house arrest since 2000, even since January of 2000, even before 9/11. And I mean, it's just like, I always give this example, but it's like someone tells you you're going to Mars. When they tell you you live in Guantánamo, it's like telling you I don't know how it looks in Mars. When I came back, I had this fantasy, this like, I pictured when I get back, I want to have all TV channels. And I want to watch all the movies that I was forbidden from to watch in Guantanamo Bay. And then I asked my family to buy me 2 satellite TVs, 2 screens. And then I asked my niece Najah to set me up the channels, put news channels together, music channels together, and so on and so forth. She looked at me and said, "Uncle, I don't know how to use a TV." And then it just hit me, it occurred to me that life has moved on and without me, and that was really very hard on me. Of course, life has moved on in very more dramatic, because as you saw in the movie, the image of my mother, praying behind me, and I could only see her in the rear view mirror, praying frantically with her tasbih, prayer beads, and blowing her prayer until she was getting smaller and smaller until I turned right. I mean, Nancy walked the street. Terry did walk those streets. And this is for real. This is not some fake. We did these things exactly where it happened. That was the very last memory I ever seen from my mother. I never got to attend her funeral. I never got to pray on her. I never get to grieve like other people grieve. And she never got to see me. And there is no accountability with the United States of America, because the most powerful country in the world, the leader of the free world. And I can only commend your bravery to come out and defend people who don't know. As far as you are concerned, we don't look like innocent people. The way we look, the way we dress, where we're from. But you decide you want the law. And honestly, it was in a way very selfish, because you were smart enough to know that this is coming to us. This is not some Arabs and Muslims, no names. This is coming home, because when we let our government decide about guilt and innocence, then we lose our democracy.
All right, thanks for that. And I think that actually takes us nicely into a question I have for you, Nancy. So I know we talked about, there's a scene in the film where Jodie Foster, who's playing you, is quoting some lines from an op-ed that you had placed in the New York Times, with which the title of it was "A Terrorist Lawyer and Proud of It." So I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs of that, because I think this plays through so much through the film. So he said, "So let me say it. I'm a terrorist lawyer. That means I'm willing to defend those accused of terrorism. I'm currently defending 2 men in prison in Guantánamo, and I defend others accused of terrorism. Contrary to recent attacks by those who claim to be supporters of American justice, my defense of people accused of serious and sometimes horrific crimes is not an endorsement of those crimes. Rather, it's a testament to the strength of my belief in and commitment to the American system of justice. Why? Because in my defense of every client, I'm defending the United States Constitution and the laws and treaties to which it is bound, and I'm defending the rule of law. If I'm a terrorist lawyer, I'm also a rule of law lawyer, a constitutional lawyer, and a treaty lawyer." And so I think that really sort of encapsulates a lot of, the question that almost every lawyer gets, but it's sort of taken to another level when your client is accused of terrorism, right? The, like, how do you defend these people kind of question. And, in the film, there's that fundamental moment where it sort of clicks with you and you tell Terry, you say, we're changing the focus. We're not focusing on him as a person. We're focusing on the Constitution. We're focusing on the rule of law. And so I would love for you to talk sort of through the process from, the film we saw from the beginning, when you're sitting around the table with your colleagues and talking about this case. And you said, this is not a request. We get to take whatever cases we're taking. This is what I'm taking. This is what I'm doing. Right. So those internal dynamics to the sort of moments where you're, I feel like it sort of runs throughout where you're sitting, the scene where you're sitting with Stu Couch, and you're both sort of, this is in the aftermath of him having sort of had his moment of, I can't do this, this is not right, and this is not what the evidence says. And he says something like, my Christmas card list just got a lot shorter, and your response was, well, not shorter than mine, right? And so I would love for you to sort of talk through some of what was behind that op-ed and that really animated a lot of what you saw through the film.
Well, start with, some of what you saw about me and my partners was actually the way it happened. But one of my partners at that point, when we were having this discussion, because I did talk to them about this case, I had no idea how expensive it would be. I didn't know if we needed an interpreter. I really didn't know anything, and I didn't know anything about Mohamedou, whether he'd even accept a woman lawyer, anything. So but I said I wanted to do it, and one of my partners said, this is why we became lawyers, do it. And of course, it ended up costing the firm well into 6 figures, not counting the time that Terry and I spent, because Terry was at that time an associate with the firm, later a partner with the film, and of course now an accomplished learned counsel, which you don't get in the movie. So I always want to say right up front, those of you who know her, of course, know that. But Stu Couch and I did not actually meet until later. So things were rearranged because this movie really ends just about before I met him. That op-ed, my op-ed came out in 2010. The story about Mohamedou that was called The Conscience of the Colonel, which in the movie Stu Couch and I are discussing, was written by Jess Braven, who is the journalist in the movie, was written in 2005, I believe. Tell me if I'm wrong, Terry. Right after we started representing Mohamedou, very shortly after. And he called, just called. I didn't really know him, but he told me he was writing this. He didn't tell us much about it. He asked if we had a letter of Mohamedou's that we could share. And we decided, and Mohamedou had given us authorization to release whatever letters we wanted. And we decided on the letter where he says what is also in the movie, when I asked him, please write down everything your interrogators have asked you. And I think he was kind of angry at me, actually. And he wrote this letter that said, that's like asking Charlie Sheen how many girlfriends he's had, because I've been interrogated so much. And that letter is in The Conscience of the Colonel. But that's the first place we learned about Stuart Couch, and that he had refused this case, and why he'd refused this case based on going to church. That's absolutely accurate in the movie. His Marine friends and people like Buckman in the movie say to him, do your job, bring charges. And then he goes to church and hears the minister say, every human being has dignity. And that actually did it for him. And that's when he said, I can't do this case. At that time, and that's from that article, we learned that they wanted to give Mohamedou the death penalty. We didn't know that before we read that article. So that gave us a lot of pause. And I called him shortly after that, and he wasn't hostile. He was never hostile to me, but he said, look, I think your client's guilty. I think they just haven't found it yet. But later he did say, as we continued to talk, if you can convince Judge Robertson, you've convinced me. And ultimately, he said, they obviously never had the evidence. It was never there. And he was glad that he had taken the position he did. At one point in some hearing, the government was asked why they never had anyone else. It's not that uncommon for a prosecutor to decide to leave a case. And the government had no answer. They simply said it never happened. So that's kind of the transition. In the meantime, Terry and I had started visiting Mohamedou right from the beginning. I went the first time, Terry went the second time. We were actually never there together until 2016, I think, or 2015 or 16. I was there with one of the other lawyers at that first meeting because I didn't speak French and she did. But then after that, none of us ever went together because we wanted to space the trips out. They took a whole week. You know, for those of you who don't know about Guantanamo, it's not like any other prison. Can I go on and explain this, Jumana? It's not like any other prison any of us have been to. You go to the prison, you go in, you meet with your client for an hour or two, you talk about the case, you find out what your client needs you to do otherwise to take care of your client, and that's it. But in Guantanamo, the plane goes down there on Monday morning, I think, and comes back on Thursday or Friday night. There are no interim airplanes. It's not like you can say, I'd like one on Wednesday, please. You go down when they go down, you come back when they come back. Those little planes we were on for a while, Air Sunshine, they were horrible little planes. I kind of liked them, but they were horrible little planes. It took a long time because they weren't allowed to fly over Cuban airspace because they fly so low. So they had to fly all the way around. And it took what? 4 hours, 5 hours, and 3.5 hours, 4 hours. Anyway, it took a long time without any facilities on the plane. But then when you got there, you were with your client all day, unless they made you leave for lunch, which sometimes they did, but all day. And we were there with Mohamedou all day for years when nothing was happening, for years. So we have a very different, Terry and I have a very developed a much closer relationship with him than one would have perhaps with another client.
Thanks, Nancy. I see from the questions that people think my leading questions may be a little long, and so we'll make sure that you all have the mic much more than I do. So Terry, I wanted to ask you, I think something that Nancy, you said definitely led into this question, which was, you know, when you went down the first time, you weren't with Terry, but you were with somebody who spoke French, and it is the need of a movie to tell a story without having every lawyer in there and every detail in there. And so sometimes they turn a person into a composite. And Terry, I know just having talked to some of our members who were really put off by, you know, Shailene Woodley's portrayal of you, so to speak, you know, as this sort of wide-eyed, a little bit nervous, but I had a bake sale. What if he's really guilty, kind of squeamish lawyer? And I know there was some story behind that, right? And them trying to get that, you know, that narrative in there, but not necessarily it being the true and real narrative. So I'd love if you could talk to people about sort of, you know, what it was versus what the movie says, and, you know, how you all arrived at that particular, I guess, you know, cinematic portrayal of you.
Sure. So Mohamedou's defense was a team of lawyers. Over the years, people would come in and they would come out of the team. And our team, I think, was reflective of a lot of lawyers' experience representing people at Guantanamo. So it was difficult. I mean, I think that we came into the case at a time when America was still reeling from 9/11 and emotions were very high. So people who are working on these cases, as Nancy's editorial reflects, got a lot of flack from not only the public, but also their families. So the filmmakers wanted to represent that, to give that experience in the movie. And so added some of the experiences of other lawyers to my character. So as Nancy said, I mean, the positive one was they made me speak French, which Mohamedou will tease me because I don't. And then I think the less positive was this idea that that my character would freak out because a client, you know, you find out that there's inculpatory evidence against a client, which never happened, and I did not freak out. We as criminal defense lawyers, it's expected. We take it in, you know, we read it, we investigate it, and then we craft our story to either rebut or incorporate it, which is what Nancy and I did. So yeah, and I think the other thing that the filmmakers wanted to do was to have a character that the audience could relate to. And so I think Shailene Woodley's naivete is something that's familiar and comfortable to the American public. And all of us who do criminal defense work have had somebody say to us, how do you do what you do? How do you represent a guilty man? And so I think having a lawyer go through that on the screen allows the audience to come in and to meet Mohamedou and to be more open than if all of us were, you know, Nancy Hollander and these very powerful lawyers. So it was, it's an ego bruiser, I can say, but I support the choices they made. I think they're the right choices. And I think that I like what Shailene did with that character.
So but yesterday you were also saying that they sort of had it set up differently. And there was a point where you were like, no, if this is how it goes down, my name cannot be used in the film.
That's right. So I think originally they were going to have my character read Mohamedou's coerced confessions and quit and say, I can't represent someone who did these things. And because I'm a criminal defense lawyer and I'm a capital defense lawyer, I can't have clients thinking that I'm the kind of person who quits when they find out there's bad information or troubling information about our clients. So at that point, I told the filmmakers that they either had to change that or they had to take my name off the character. And so they agreed to the story that you see of me having that crisis of conscience and then Nancy firing me. So I didn't like it, but I could live with that.
Well, she does say, though, I didn't mean to quit. She says that. She says it quietly, but she says, I'm not saying I'm going to quit. So it put the emphasis on me to fire her, which I would have done to that character, but I wouldn't have done it the way Jody did, because Jody made me meaner than I am. And she said that she made me meaner than I am. But as we all know, I would have said to that person who said he's guilty, I would have said, if this troubles you so much, maybe you should reconsider being a criminal defense lawyer. And then the last words of that scene, which I can say here, I got in some trouble for saying on CNN, I think. But I got them in trouble. The last words of that scene are my words, where I say, you have to believe your own shit. And we all know that. And Jody took those words right out of my mouth because it was a conversation she and I had.
All right, I'm going to ask you all, this is one for you collectively before we go to the Q&A. I could ask you guys questions all day, but I won't do that. There is this scene where I think, Nancy, just you went down and talking about, you sort of asked, well, tell me everything that happens. And Mohamedou says, I'm still here. You want me to set this place on fire? And you said, well, the case. And he said, well, the case. What about the person? Right. And I think it's really, when you think about this, the whole setup, right, where, and I'm sure, and you all thought about this, right? So you're women, you're going down to this US base, you're US lawyers, talking to this person who's been sort of spirited across the world to torture chambers by the US government and then tortured by the US government, and like how you build that relationship. And for you, Mohamedou, like how do you build a trust in your lawyers in that kind of a situation? It's, this is sort of like on steroids for having to go in and build a relationship with a client in this particular scenario. And Mohamedou, I'll just say, when you speak, because I think some people don't have this on gallery, hold up your book again when you speak, because then when you're speaking, you'll be on the screen for everybody. So not everybody saw the cover of your book, and I want to make sure they get to see that. So again, when you speak, hold it up, and then people will get a chance to see it. But I don't know who wants to jump in first, but go ahead.
Hopefully Mohamedou will jump in first, and then Nancy and I can jump in.
Well, I just want to mention something that is very important to me. The playing field, injustice at level between the lawyers, the defense lawyers, and the prosecution, because the prosecution has bottomless wallet. They can hire anyone they want. They can call any expert. They can go everywhere they want. There is no limit to their budget. And they have everything. They know always everything before it goes to court. And they have stuff that the court does not have. So, and the lawyers, they doing this pro bono. And we want them to pay, first-class experts to explain the whole thing, It's so miserable, I just was watching it. So when my lawyers came to me, I had nothing to lose. I hit rock bottom. Already wrote confession, already made my peace that I would never leave Guantánamo. There was no, I could only get better. And my hopes actually were much higher than the reality turned out to be. So I would think this is America now. Alhamdulillah, thank God. Now the conscience of America has awoken. Now I have this very small David lawyer against the Goliath of the United States, and I will win, and then I will go back and they will allow me to go to America and enjoy the country. That was very, very far away fantasy of mine. And it was hard, because I think I don't blame myself, honestly, in this one. I think I really trust my lawyer, but he has to trust in me. And this came up many times and I could understand that, because he said, what's going on? This guy, how can they spend so much money on this guy and he didn't do anything? And there are reports. He saw this guy, he did this guy, he went so, and there is so much information. But this is all the ploy of the US government. They feed the defense lawyer what they want to feed them. They control the journalist. Every piece of information that was written out of me was given exclusively by some US government officials to journalists. Almost all the reports were negative reports about me because of this special access. And then she kept telling me, so what's going on? And she told me, I always kept telling her, I don't know what to tell you, but I didn't do anything. At least that was my perception, honestly. But when she knew, when Nancy is convinced, then she would put her weight all the way, But you have to convince her that this is the right way, the right thing, that you're right and that you are not playing with her,
Let me go next, because I think I can fill in a little bit from what we couldn't hear of Mohamedou. So we've talked about this before. I believe he did trust us from the beginning. And I think he's right. He had nothing to lose. All of a sudden he had lawyers, and I had written to him, and he had written 100 and some pages for us to tell us about him. We didn't get to read it right away. It went up to Washington, and by the time we read that, we were also reading his letters that were describing it in more detail. But my feeling at the beginning, when we walked in and he hugged us and said, my lawyers, was that he did trust us. I think it took us longer to trust him, not to trust him personally. I had no fear of him at all. I wasn't afraid of him, but to believe that all of these things he was saying that had happened to him had really happened to him, and also that all of the government's allegations were not true. And I've had clients tell me they're innocent for 42 years when they're not. I've had clients tell me that's not true, and it turns out to be true. So he's right. We had to really dig into it, to not because we weren't going to represent him regardless. That's not the issue. But what we were able to present to the government, and we had to be satisfied that our positions were honest positions. And that took us a long time. It took a long time and a lot of work and a lot of sifting through this government stuff, which turned out most of it came from Ramzi Ben Al-Shib, as you see in the movie. They never gave us any of the circumstances documents about him. He's one of the 9/11 defendants, and 9/11 was gone. By the time we went to court, the only thing they had was that Mohamedou had joined Al-Qaeda in 1990 to 92. And as I believe I said to the judge in that hearing, I think we did too. We provided all the Stinger missiles. We were supportive of that. And you can find the evidence that we were supportive of that effort. And the judge's response was, yes, Ms. Hollander, we've all seen Charlie Wilson's War. And he said that's absurd. that has nothing to do with this. But it took years to get to that point. So I agree with Mohamedou that he trusted us. It took us time to really believe that everything he was telling us was accurate. That's my view of it. Terry may have a different.
No, I have the same view. And I think that the client-lawyer relationship at Guantánamo really highlighted many of the issues that we face daily as criminal defense lawyers. One being, Nancy was talking, or we were talking earlier about enforcing the rule of law. Well, one of the things that as defense lawyers we have to do in enforcing the rule of law is we have to put the client before the cause. And at the time, Guantánamo was very much a cause. And there was this united effort of how people should respond to the government and the steps that should be taken. And those were not always the right steps for Mohamedou. And so there was that real tension between sort of the community and the individual lawyers that we've all experienced in multi-defendant cases or unpopular cases. I think the other part of it is, as Nancy was saying, because we would spend days at Guantánamo, we would spend all of that time with Mohamedou. And the case took 15 years, and that a lot of those years were very slow. There was nothing to talk about in terms of the case, or very little. So we would spend time just human being to human being talking. Mohamedou kept trying to teach me about the theory of relativity, which I'm embarrassed to say, despite his efforts for 14 years, I still don't get. And we would talk about our families, and so we became really friends at Guantánamo. I mean, I consider a lot of my clients friends, but I think Mohamedou is the client who I know the most and I'm closest to. And it's been really gratifying since Mohamedou got free, because all of the people who I've talked about with my family members with him, he's now Facebook friends with, and so I think Mohamedou and my sister were on a webinar together. And so it's really come full circle. So yeah, everything that we experience in our cases, I think, was amplified at Guantánamo.
All right, great, thank you. I'm going to go now to some of the Q&As, and I'm going to put a few of them together because they kind of go together. And so first I'm going to start with questions about the making of the film.
Mohamedou wanted to say something.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, Jumana, today, I was sifting through my feed and positive comments about the movie. One of them I saw and I was laughing because it was a French-speaking person who was praising the movie and citing Nancy as the defendant.
Maybe a little miscommunication.
But when you think about it, Jumana, to defend someone, defendant is from the defense.
Yeah.
And so he cited her as the defendant.
So instead of defender or defendant.
Yes.
Some things don't always translate. That's funny. So yeah, some details about making the movie. I will say I was struck by it did kind of look like Guantánamo, and they had a lot of detail in there, like the interrogations being called reservations, or the way they would salute each other, honor bound to defend freedom, right? So the question is sort of, where was it filmed? Obviously it wasn't actually Guantánamo, and did the government cooperate to any degree in the filming of the movie?
Well, the government did not cooperate at all. We didn't ask the government to cooperate. Nobody made that request. The film, all of it was, except for Mauritania, all of it was filmed in Cape Town, South Africa. That was built from nothing, literally from nothing. Mohamedou was able to describe his cell, but not much else. But they looked at things, they read things, they looked at other things. They asked me and Terry lots and lots of questions, and that's how they got it built. The same thing for my office that you see there. That was an empty warehouse, and they made it into an office. Afghanistan was literally right outside Cape Town. There are big mountains there. The restaurant where Couch and I meet, Mohamedou and I went to that restaurant. I have a picture of the two of us sitting in that restaurant at exactly those same places. So they created all that. This guy, his name is Michael Cartland, and he's a fabulous set designer. Mauritania was all done in Mauritania, and as Mohamedou said, that scene of him driving away was actually right in front of Mohamedou's house. Terry and I have both been there. And so that's how it was. That's how they did it. They did it all. Lots of movies are made in Cape Town. They have every actor you see there who is not the main actors are all South Africans, South African actors.
All right, so I guess going along this line, I don't know, Terry, if you wanted to add something, or are you good with that?
I'm good.
Okay. So going along with that, there's also a couple questions about, you know, your ability to get documents, read documents, all of that. So I'm going to sort of push some of those together. You know, one of the questions is, did they ever violate your attorney-client communications? We know we've seen, you know, there's been the oh, we don't have any audio, just video or whatever, and suddenly it turns out they're listening to client meetings. So that's one question, if they ever actually violated your attorney-client communication. Another question was about the case discovery, and did you have to leave it all in the building? Could you take anything with you to your office? And so how much time did that take you to go through all that discovery? So those are just a couple of questions about some of the logistics of the representation that people have.
I can take that. I think Nancy should talk about the attorney-client issue because she worked on more cases, and I think her other case did have that issue. For Mohamedou, we're not aware of any instances in which they violated our attorney-client privilege. I mean, we're always suspicious it's the government, and so the fact that we're not aware of it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. And in terms of the discovery, I mean, so everything that Mohamedou would write to us and all of the discovery we got from the government was taken to a secure facility like you see in the movie. And we would go through it, and we can only take out what the government cleared. So we had you see in the movie, the privilege team, which was supposed to be sequestered from the government, whose sole job was to review documents, determine if they were classified. And if they were, then we'd have to keep it in the secure facility. So I spent, many, I have to think over time, I probably spent many months in the secure facility going through the discovery, you know, trying to integrate it on these very antiquated computers. I think they even had a computer that you still had to put the little squared floppy disk in to get it to boot up. I mean, it was like, so everything was so old, but all of our pleadings had to be written in the secure facility. All of Mohamedou's letters in the secure facility. So yeah, it was very, very slow going. It took a long time for us to get his letters, to respond to his letters.
Nancy, you want to take the attorney-client privilege question?
Well, I agree with Terry. We had no reason to think that it was violated in Mohamedou's case. In my other case, Ibrahim al-Nasri, and in the 9/11 case, there are numerous interferences with the attorney-client privilege. For me, I can't even see that client anymore, al-Nasri, starting in 2013, because the government, I think it was the CIA, decided that I might disclose some classified evidence in the representations of him in the European Court of Human Rights. And I had I had to meet with someone, and then she said that everything was fine. I knew what the rules were, and some flag officer wrote that I was cleared. And then a week later, we got that same document whited out, and the cleared was uncleared. So although I still have a top secret SCI, sensitive compartmentalized information, I still have that clearance. I can't see that client anymore. And that was just the beginning. There were microphones, there are all kinds of things. There are lawyers who had to quit because there's no ethical way to meet with the client. So it's a huge problem in Guantánamo. It's just not one we had with Mohamedou.
All right, thanks. Mohamedou, now that the star of the show is back on screen, I have a couple of questions for you that I'm also going to put together. And it's really about sort of your presence and your ability to seem, you know, so positive, so joyous, you know, after having gone through so much trauma, and looking at all of that, right? Even in the movie, it portrays you as somebody who reacts to this sort of incredible situations with humor, with levity. And so the question is sort of how much of that is defense mechanism, how much of that is you, how is it, I think people just have the question of how is it that you're able to be sort of so present and so joyous really in the context of what we know you've lived through.
Jumana, I really don't know the answer to your question, but you are a lawyer and Nancy, people in this, one of the things that prisons teaches you is discipline, because when they shut that door, when they slam that door shut, you have nothing to think about except yourself, and it's very important because when you're angry, you cannot let out your anger. You cannot leave the house and go outside blowing steams, and you cannot do anything. You cannot defend yourself, and that's a very hard lesson, especially for me because I spent over 90% of my time in total isolation. I only see the guard. So a lot of it probably just like me not letting my emotions get the best of me.
I think a lot of that comes through both, in the film, in anybody who hears from you. I think, I remember the scene when you're testifying to the court and you sort of have that explanation of the need to forgive, and equating, in Arabic, the term forgiveness also being the term freedom, and how that gave you a sense of freedom in terms of letting that go. And so it just
Matt kept saying Jumana. Good Jumana.
I'm going to say my name. So everybody knows I'm going to get distracted by the child. Well, let me ask another question then, which, anybody can jump in. But so this is a question about, obviously the film did a lot of flashbacks, right? There's a point where you guys are going down, but then it's going back to, scenes where you were being interrogated, and it had the dates on them, but it could make it very sort of confusing. And so part of the question was, did all the torture that was portrayed in the film, was that all at Guantanamo? Was some of it at black sites or in other countries before coming to Guantanamo? And, how did the timing go in terms of when that particular regime of torture in Guantanamo ended and when you all started your representation?
So what's portrayed in the film all took place at Guantanamo. Mohamedou, as you see, he turned himself into the Mauritanian police. And from there, he was rendered to Jordan and kept in a Jordanian prison for 9 months, then rendered to Bagram Air Force Base for a couple weeks and brought to Guantanamo. So the torture that you're seeing, most of that, and Mohamedou and Nancy can correct me if I'm wrong, took place in between 2003 and 2004. And our representation started in March of 2005. So when we started the representation, the worst of the torture was over, but there was obviously an ongoing concern because Mohamedou was at Guantanamo that they would retaliate against him for seeking his rights, seeking habeas. And so one of the first things we did in the case was to file a motion to prohibit them from torturing him or retaliating against him for his filing of the habeas petition.
All right, if I could jump in, these are some of the sort of technical representation questions that I'm going to lump a few together and pose to you, Nancy and Terry. One was just, did you use investigators in the case? There's another question about if in these types of cases, is there a place or a role for a mitigation specialist? I know you never got to the point of there being death penalty charges, but certainly, that's been a part of death eligible cases. I think there was one more that I was going to put in here. Forgive me, because they're all, they're not necessarily asked at the same time. The last one being that the movie doesn't really specify or explain why the case was dismissed. And so could you explain a little bit about that, or even why the government's appeal took 7 years where he was held beyond. So those are, you can ask, I don't know if you're writing them down or you need me to revisit them, but those are sort of some procedural questions that we got.
Well, we did have an investigator, a wonderful investigator, Chris Chang. He's terrific. Terry, I think, is still using him on a case. He speaks French. He went with us when Mohamedou first got out. He went there before, he went after to do work for us. And he's a terrific investigator who anybody should consider using. We didn't ever get to the point of a mitigation specialist in this case because there were never any charges. So you've got to remember he was never charged with a crime. It's not that it was even death eligible. It just never happened. So we didn't get that far in this case. But what happened was we won the habeas case in 2010. Judge Robertson granted it, ordered Mohamedou released. Under the Obama administration, the Justice Department appealed. They appealed almost all of the cases that were dismissed, except maybe a couple juveniles. And we went to the appellate court. The court remanded the case, wanted more fact finding, said that the law had changed in the interim. I mean, rather than going into all of that, let me just say that the district court never did anything. Judge Robertson retired. We had Judge Sullivan for a while. The government was afraid of him. And so we got a whole bunch of discovery, most of which was totally irrelevant, but boxes of it. Then we had Judge Lamberth, I think, toward the end. The district judges were not pursuing these cases when they came back. And I believe, I'm not burdened by any knowledge here. I just believe that the district judges were frightened of the Court of Appeals and didn't want to lose any more cases. So it sat there. Then President Obama started something called the Periodic Review Board. Although he started it with an executive order in 2011, it wasn't put into place until 2013. Mohamedou got a letter saying you're going to get this, but he never got one until 2016. Was it 2016? Beginning, yeah. And that's when Terry was actually in Guantánamo with Mohamedou. When he got that letter, he was told that he could have one lawyer. It was Terry who actually went in with him. He had a personal representative. They were all assigned personal representatives who were not lawyers. We had a guy named Reggie Jackson, who I think is an engineer by training. Fabulous. He's a commander, Navy commander, and some of them were not great and didn't care. Reggie cared. He's a friend to this day, and he really helped Mohamedou, and I know Mohamedou would agree with me, worked on his statement, what he was going to say. This is not a court. This is 5 or 6 intelligence agencies. They're all secret. We had no idea who they were. We just assumed they were the CIA, DIA, DOD, NSA, but who knows? And Terry was able to be with him for part of it. And then she had to leave. And then it was Mohamedou, but we did a lot of preparation for that. And that group had to determine that he was not a significant threat to the US and its allies. At this time, they didn't care theoretically about what he was accused of, although I think they did care. But they found it very quickly. Congress had 25 days to approve or not approve. Congress, I think, may have been out of session at that time. But in any event, the 25 days lapsed. Mohamedou was then the question was, where was he going to go? And we had to go with Hina Shamsi from the ACLU, who's much more diplomatic than me or Terry in dealing with the State Department. We had to go, and we had numerous meetings with them to prove that he could go to Mauritania, that he had family and resources, that we would be there, that he was medically equipped, etc. So that was the whole process. Ultimately, he got out and went home, and he got a passport. I saw this question. The US made a deal with all those countries that wherever they release people that they would not give them a passport for either 2 or 3 years. Mohamedou was actually the 3-year one. On the 3rd year, literally in October, on the 17th or 16th, he got a passport. He still, however, does not have a visa, was turned down in the UK and Germany, and we're back trying to get those visas now. He got a visa to South Africa, and he and I met there on the set, but he has gotten no other visas. So that's our next fight.
All right, thank you. So Mohamedou, I have some questions for you. One is about the character Marseille in the film. Was he, one of the questions there is he an actual person, or was he sort of a composite of, a number of people were there? So that's one. And the second question was how you felt about Tahar Rahim's portrayal of you in the film. Those of us who watched it thinks he did a really good job, but it's very different, I'm sure, to watch somebody who's supposed to be playing you. So, and then, I'm sorry, the last one that just came in, someone would love to know about how you met and married your wife, which was mentioned at the end, but nobody knows how that came about. So
I start with the easy one. My wife, Kiri, is a lawyer, and she defended also Mauritanians. And through the network, I know her. So and then we just like connected through social media, and we fell in love and we married, and we have a very beautiful son. And I'm enjoying my life. And she's my biggest support, thank God. As to the other questions, so the Marseille is a composite of different personalities. There was a guy from Lyon, and we used to shout, talk to each other through, cross talking, they call it, through the blocks, and we never saw each other. We later on we saw each other from afar. And the other people is a Saudi guy and another Yemeni guy. Both died in prison. We are told they committed suicide, but they died. And it was like so sad, like to pray on them alone. Everybody, I prayed on them alone, I only knew about one of the death when the guard came to me and took everything I had, like razor. They took my sheets, and then they didn't tell me anything why. And later on, one of the guard came to me and said, because someone committed suicide. Portrayal of me by Rahim is fantastic. Someone, who looks better, younger, stronger. I put him in my profile. Next time I join one of those dating apps. Yes, absolutely, 100%.
So now we know if you're ever portrayed in a film, go with somebody younger, stronger, better looking, and then use them in your profile. That's good advice. So I'm going to ask a question which I know the answer to, but I'm going to ask it of you guys anyway. Has there been any consequences, discipline, or sanctions meted out to those who authorized or directly engaged in the torture of Mohamedou? Yeah, that's an easy no. So, asked and answered. It would be, truthfully, it would be great if there was, but not only did you have the Obama administration who insisted they were looking forward and not back and not necessarily interested in doing that kind of accountability, we then had 4 years of an administration who, the best thing we could say they did is they didn't, in fact, fill it up with bad guys as they had threatened to do. So there has not really been, other than some investigations which are not fully public, there's not been accountability, individual or otherwise, and it's a continuing problem. So Nancy, there's a question for you about how you got approached in the first place. Was it something about having a security clearance? Was there another reason? Just how did you get approached to represent him, and how that came to you versus how it happened in the film?
It happened pretty much as it happened in the film, except that it didn't happen in Albuquerque. I knew a lawyer named Emmanuel Altit, French lawyer, from some teaching we had done in The Hague, teaching people how to cross-examine in international tribunals. And that's how I knew him. And he sent an email saying the family, saying he had heard from a Mauritanian lawyer. And you know, Mauritania was a French colony up until the 60s. So they have a relationship, and he knew this Mauritanian lawyer, Mr. Ibete, had written and said that this family was looking for their son, and they believed he was in Guantánamo because of an article in Der Spiegel. And in fact, it was difficult to find him, and the government wouldn't tell us whether he was there. Terry finally found him on the website of Cage Prisoners. I believe I'm right about that. That's an NGO that still exists. It's called Cage now, and found his picture. And how we actually were able to know that he was there, I don't remember. Maybe Terry does. But I agreed to represent him. I asked Emmanuel, I remember saying, is there any money for this? And he said, that was a joke, right? And I said, yeah, I guess that was a joke. I did have a security clearance already. So did Terry from the Holy Land case. I had mine from before then. Terry had one because we were in the middle, actually, at that time, of working on the trial against the Holy Land and 5 defendants. So we had clearances and could go there. And Sylvia had been engaged differently through CCR, the Center for Constitutional Rights. They were assigning lawyers to everyone through family members as next friend, whether they had asked to be assigned or not. And so I called her and she said, well, if the family wants you, you can do it. And I said, yeah, but you speak French. Are you willing to stay on? And she did. She ultimately left us, but she did stay on and go with me because we hoped and assumed that Mohamedou spoke French in addition to Arabic. As it turned out, he did. And that's how it started. The only thing I don't remember is Terry found his name, and I don't remember how we got the government to admit that he was there, because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to get on the plane and I wouldn't have been able to write to him. And maybe Terry remembers that. I don't remember. Do you remember, Terry?
I do. So the media had filed a FOIA request for transcripts of what at the time were called combatant status review tribunals. So one of my first jobs was to go through this heavily redacted, hundreds and hundreds of pages to try to find something unredacted that was consistent with what we knew about Mohamedou. And ultimately we did. And then in terms of going to see him, what they told us was they wouldn't tell us if he was there, but told us to file a petition. And once we filed the petition, then they would respond, yes, he's there, and you can go visit him at Guantánamo. So I think that's when Nancy and Sylvia were able to go for the first time in June of 2005.
All right, thanks. So there's a couple of questions for you, Mohamedou. Oh, well, then we'll go back to another one about the details of the case. So Mohamedou, for you, someone was saying, at some point you mentioned hitting rock bottom and asking sort of what does that look like? And I remember in one of the scenes when you'd written out the first confession and you looked up and said, can I sleep now? And so I feel like those were really impactful scenes. But I think the question of what does rock bottom look like in a context like that? And then the other question is, in a lot of ways, you've definitely demonstrated forgiveness, this sort of willingness to figure out how to move forward. And, did that happen as a result of your kidnapping, rendition, detention, or is that just your nature? Is it your faith, your religion, a combination of all of them? What does that come from? So those are 2 questions for you.
Short answer, I don't know the answer to the question as how I survived. Because I know Nancy cannot tell you everything she knows. And I know Terry cannot. It's very hard. I get very frustrated because when I ask them sometimes, they said, we cannot tell you. And I say, is this classified? They say we cannot tell you that either. So, but I know that both know and you, Jumana, do know that a very big portion of the detainees lost their minds. I know did lose their minds at least for some time. And it's very hard. And one of the things I didn't know that pain has a taste, that fear has a taste in the mouth when you're afraid. This very distinct, very bitter taste that comes to your mouth. And I think the scene summed it up very well when they said, now I can sleep. Because I was just waiting like the sentence, you know. Charlie told me, he was like plotting, he told me, they going to help me get 30 years instead of death penalty. And I was looking at him like a rock. You know, I had no feeling whatsoever. You know, moving, you know, in motion because I want to follow, but I want to go back to myself. And I can totally tell you that I forgave him and I forgave Richard Zuli. I forgave the Dahi who gave me to them. I forgave the Jordanian. And I love this saying from a Canadian from Lebanese descent, a young woman. I wish I had said it. She said, I forgive you not because you asked or you deserve, but because I need to move forward. And that was the real freedom, you know, something that you own and you can give and you lose nothing, you know, except, you know, frustration and resentment.
It's really beautiful. It's sort of odd to go back to now a very procedural kind of question, but there's one for you, Nancy and Terry, which is about the discovery that was released to you and the information you had access to, which obviously you couldn't always even share with your client. And I feel like this could apply to so many of your cases, but did any of that give you a concern about your personal safety or being under government surveillance, having your calls monitored, you know, any of those kinds of concerns? Did they come up?
I don't know that I had any concerns about my safety. I mean, we definitely were concerned about the government monitoring us. I think that anyone who works in this field, we had the same concerns during Terry Nichols, that there's going to be some sort of retaliation against you or that you're going to be monitored. It was, as Mohamedou said, incredibly frustrating to learn information that was critical to the case and not be able to share it with him. I've never been in that situation before. I mean, normally if I know something, my client knows it. And so that was super frustrating. And obviously we were very careful because if we were to cross the line, we would no longer be able to represent Mohamedou if not be facing criminal charges. And so one of my jobs was to keep Nancy out of trouble and help her draw that line. And, you know, and that continues even to today when we were talking earlier about reconstructing Guantánamo and the movie people talking to Nancy and to me about what it looked like and what the conditions were like. We're still restricted on what we can say. So we still have to be very careful, you know, years later about what we're disclosing. And so usually it's referring somebody to Mohamedou who can speak more openly than we can. But yeah, that was one of the worst parts, I think, of working on the case, was not being able to be completely open with your client. And I know that was super frustrating to Mohamedou.
All right, so on the lighter side of questions.
Jumana,
I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to give you a tip. They get kidnapped and dragged to Guantanamo Bay and have Nancy representing them. They ask her a question about classified material. She will not tell you, but look at her face. And then you will read everything.
So what I'm hearing is I should play poker with Nancy. That's good to know. So yeah, I'm going to ask now the totally frivolous question, but one we all want to know, I guess. What's it like working with Jodie Foster?
Well, I met Jodie for the first time in London. I happened to be there. She happened to be there. I walked in to this little restaurant at a place where she was staying, she walked out. She had just come from either working out or a shower. Her hair was wet. And she walked up to me and we said hello. And she said, I just want you to know, I've never played a real person before. And I said, she said, so this is all new to me. And I said, well, I've never been played by anyone, so it's all new to me too. And that's how our conversation started. We talked for about an hour. She's very perceptive. She then came to my apartment in New York, and she wanted to know lots of things, asked me things about, you know, what's on the wall and who people were. And we talked for about 4 hours, I think. We just sat and talked and drank tea. And she obviously picked up a great deal in that period of time. She's been acting since she was 3 years old. She really does know what she's doing. And besides that, she's really a lovely person. And also, she really believes in this movie and believes in Mohamedou and believes in what we're saying about closing Guantánamo. She and Shailene and Kevin, our director, all gave statements to Amnesty International just a few days ago, where every one of them said, close Guantánamo, close Guantánamo, close Guantánamo. So it was really wonderful to work with actors. Shailene's the same way. She told us, I think, that she'd gotten arrested at one of the pipeline demonstrations. And when we met her, when Mohamedou and I had dinner with them in South Africa, and, you know, she's just like a person. She's not Hollywood-like at all. If you saw when she won the Golden Globe, she was home in her pajamas with her, you know, her wife and her dog. And by the way, I do want to mention that the BAFTA, which is the British, I don't know what it stands for, but it's the British something, which is the same as the Oscars. And the nominations came out today, and I think we got 5 nominations, including Tahar, who was also nominated for a Golden Globe. So we're very excited about that. It's very important in Europe, extremely important in Europe.
So that's phenomenal, Nancy. And we're definitely going to have to work out a custody sharing agreement between you and Jody of the Golden Globe.
Well, if it hadn't been virtual, I'd have been there with her, you know, in some sort of fancy dress, and she'd have been in some sort of fancy dress, and I'd have been right there. I mean, I missed my opportunity, but it's all right.
Well, you know, you come to an NACDL red carpet, we'll take your pictures. We'll fawn over you. So I know we're getting close to time, so I'm going to wrap up sort of these last questions, and I want each of you to, you know, be able to take a shot at answering them, but also, you know, any words that you want to wrap us up with. So, you know, I will say, if you look in the Q&A, Mohamedou, there's some very kind words for you, including just comments about your attitude, your ability, the testament to your character, your spirit. They want to nominate you for a Nobel Peace Prize, and someone else who's apologizing on behalf of the government for everything that's happened to you, whose husband apparently says that eating goat in your hometown was one of the best meals he ever had. But so for these last questions, just to wrap up sort of the question of, so what happens now? How does this all end? Close it down, have trials. Someone else asked, like, how many people still there? Are they all represented by counsel of the original that were there? How many died while in prison? Just sort of the question of what has it been like and what happens now going forward? So I say either you or Nancy, Terry, you or Nancy start, and then I would love to sort of close it out with Mohamedou.
Okay. So in terms of what happens now, I think it's what we've been wanting since the very beginning, which is to close Guantánamo, for those people who are charged with a criminal offense, to try them in federal court. You know, federal court is a reliable and fair forum in which to try a criminal case, and there's no reason why these cases were being brought by military commission and not in the federal court. So, and then if someone can't be charged with a crime or can't be convicted of a crime, they need to be let go. I mean, this idea that you can hold on to somebody for 14 years or for 20 years without charge simply because you think that they might do something that is, you know, inconsistent with American values. So I think those are the two things we're asking for, and indefinite detention. If you're going to try somebody, try them in federal court and then close Guantanamo.
Well, I think Terry said it all. When I first signed the contract for this film, Lloyd Levin and Bay Levin came to visit me and Terry in our office, and we were very impressed that these producers flew out to meet with us, and we decided that we wanted to go forward with this. I signed the contract. I signed all the book contracts too, because Mohamedou was in prison. But we hoped that the movie would help get him out. We hoped the book would help get him out, and I believe it did. I think it made a difference. But Mohamedou got out, of course, way before this movie was made. And now we really hope that this film will help in some way to get the other 40 out of Guantanamo in all the ways that Terry said. I'm not going to repeat because I agree with them all. We need to lock the door and close that place, end indefinite detention, and provide the rule of law for everyone. And I know Mohamedou shares this. We really want people to see this film and put Guantanamo back into the public eye.
And Mohamedou, I know you had, oh, I'm sorry, Terry.
I just wanted to add one thing, real quick thing, is that, Mohamedou is an exceptional human being, as everyone recognizes. But, there are a lot of people who are done grave injustices at Guantanamo, and those people are also speaking out. And so I encourage people who are watching this to research those people. I know there was a podcast on NPR called Love, and I think it was Mansour Al-Dahi who was talking of this beautiful message. Mozambique is on social media. So I think that we should be listening to all of these voices, promoting all of these voices, and learning from them so that Guantanamo never happens again.
All right, Mohamedou. So this then goes to you. I know yesterday you had some pretty clear thoughts on what you think needs to happen from here on out for Guantanamo and the people who are still there, but also any closing thoughts you might have.
I know this may not seem to be very popular with some people, but I trust the president, Mr. Biden. I think he's a good man. And I know he's been through pain and suffering. He lost his wife, ex-wife at a very young age. He lost his son. I have a son. I cannot even imagine what it looks like, how much suffering and pain he's been through. And unfortunately, those are the ingredients. Empathy with other people. Democracy works. Dictatorship doesn't work. This obsession of some American agencies that only dictatorships work. They go down and dirty. Get the bad guys. No gloves. Only those gloves of democracy, those gloves of the rule of law, are the one who made America great, made the Western hemisphere great. They have more money, better economy, better health, better human rights because of the gloves of the rule of law. Just look at our countries. We don't have the gloves. We can throw anyone in prison. But look at us. Please think about this and understand that those gloves of the rule of law are the one who protect everyone in the end.
Well, thank you for that. And I want to express my deep gratitude to all of you, obviously Nancy and Terry, for taking this case on and representing your client in the way that everybody should be represented when they're faced with the power of the state. Mohamedou, obviously, just for all of your insight, your humor, your humanity, and your willingness to share what's happened to you. I would just remind everyone, if you haven't seen the film, watch it. If you didn't read his memoir, it was Guantanamo Diaries. It'll now be published as Mauritanian. And, I can only imagine, I'm really looking forward to, again, he's now a novelist. So you can read Mohamedou's book, The Actual True Story of Ahmed and Zarqa, which is out now. You can get it on wherever it is you like to purchase books. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to those of you who logged on. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, read the books, watch the movie. And thank you so much. Again, NACDL is just thrilled to be able to host this conversation.